Live by the special teams, die by the special teams. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 23 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska Football podcast where we cover the Husker season and team news as it progresses throughout the year. Every video episode is uploaded to YouTube, and the audio versions can be found on Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you enjoy the content, please consider leaving a like and following. It helps me grow the podcast and reach more ears. Getting into this week's final recap, though, we have the Week 12 matchup against the number 16 Iowa Hawkeyes. The score ended at 21-28 Iowa. Getting into the stats, Nebraska had 198 passing yards. They had 129 yards on the ground for a total of 327. Iowa had 178 through the air, 186 on the ground for a total of 364. Looking at the defenses, Nebraska had 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and 1 turnover. Iowa had the 2 sacks, 4 tackles for losses, and 2 turnovers. Special teams, we did not attempt a field goal, but we did have 3 punts for an average of 40.7 yards. Iowa had 4 for 4 on their field goal attempts, and they had 2 punts for 44 yards. First downs were pretty similar. We had 18 to their 19. Time of possession, we had 28 minutes and 7 seconds. They had it for 31 minutes and 53 seconds. Penalties, we had 5 penalties for 50 yards, and they had 4 penalties for 25 yards. So getting into the stats and how that affected things, looking at the offense first, Logan Smothers had a solid first start as starting quarterback for Nebraska. Even with a shortened week of first-team reps, he was surprisingly confident coming out there. Samori Toure made a comment in the post-game about how he was kind of surprised by his confidence right out of the gate. He didn't need time to warm up and get settled in. He was confident right off the bat, and that showed throughout his play. So he went 16 for 22 on his passing attempts for 198 yards and 1 interception. He had 24 carries for 64 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So through 3 quarters, he had Nebraska's offense moving. The interception didn't come till the last drive of the game, but ultimately the inexperience and lack of established chemistry with the running backs and with the receivers really caught up to him and showed in the fourth quarter. No one really stood out, though, in the big rivalry game. So you had a backup quarterback coming in for his first career start. So you kind of expected somebody else to kind of step up and, take over a lot of the responsibilities there, whether that be a running back kind of establishing the run game himself or a wide receiver getting open consistently. You never really seen that in the game. You had running backs combined for 65 total rushing yards on 17 carries between the running backs. For sack-adjusted yards, the total, including Logan Smothers' runs, was 142 yards. So we rushed for an average of 3.5 yards per attempt, and that's not going to win you games against Iowa, against Minnesota, against Wisconsin. So against these Big Ten teams, 3.5 average rushing yards is not going to cut it. Toure had 67 yards on 6 catches, so he was fairly productive, but Allen was the only other player to have over 50 yards receiving on the game. Only 3 times did we come away with points on 10 total drives. So we had a 30% score rate, and every one of those was touchdowns. So that's the upside. But out of 10 times, you only come away with 3 touchdowns. It's not what you're hoping to see in an offense that's supposed to be much better. They really struggled with getting the rhythm back in the fourth quarter, though. We will do a deeper dive on this as well. But in back-to-back worst case scenario drives, they started out the fourth quarter. So Nebraska's offense first 10 snaps in the fourth quarter resulted in a punt that was returned for a touchdown, a fumble that was lost, and a safety. And then after that, a 3-and-out. So 10 snaps, we had the ball on offense, and you have, it's just a back-to-back bad drives. The offensive line could explain a little bit of those troubles. Matt Sectorman left the game, and Brock Bando and Ethan Piper came into the rotation. They didn't directly shoot us in the foot like they have in the past with the penalties, with the holding calls, things like that. But the broken protection allowed both the block punt to happen and the safety to occur as well. So flipping over to the defense, you had JoJo Daniels. You had JoJo Doman out. Damian Daniels and Deontay Williams' absences were all noticed in the game. All those guys play major roles in the defense. The backups came in and they played okay. They played their role. They didn't allow we didn't get run on. We did get run on. We didn't get absolutely run over. We didn't get blown out like you would expect to see in some of these cases when you're missing a lot of key pieces on your defense. But the bend don't break mentality really showed up in the game. So the first 8 full drives for Iowa only netted 9 points total. They had 3 field goals in their first 8 drives, and the Black Shirts only allowed 1 offensive touchdown on their 9 drives. So you kind of feel bad for these guys because on 9 drives, you're allowing 1 total touchdown with 3 field goals. You're holding them to field goals for most of the game. They began the fourth quarter up 12 points. So they had done their job through 3 quarters. They had given up a lot of yards. Yes, they'd given up a lot of running yards to the running back. He kept gashing us for 6, 7, 8 yards at a time. And I mean, that's how it's kind of been in a lot of games, but that's really when you miss your Daniels coming through the center, your Jojo Doman running off the outside, your Deontay Williams coming up and making a big hit. You're missing these big guys in those little moments, not necessarily on touchdown drives, on little moments where the running back's not getting hit in the backfield or not getting hit on the line. He's getting 4 yards just because of the push from the offensive line. But like I said, the defense began the fourth quarter up 12 points. Iowa's next 2 drives resulted in 3 points total. So their first 2 drives in the fourth quarter, they got 1 field goal out of that. And yet somehow the game was tied. So when Iowa kicks that field goal in the fourth quarter, they went from being up 12 to now they're tied. It's frustrating for the defense because they're doing their job. In the fourth quarter, you have a 12-point lead. You allow them to only get 1 field goal, and somehow they're tied with your team. I can't even imagine how those guys feel. They are doing their job, and they're somehow still losing games, and it's been that way all season. Nash Hutmacher, in his post game, he aggressively said that somebody made a comment about special teams and how he would pursue that going next year, and he's like, "Put me in. I will make sure the job gets done." Essentially, and you can feel that. You can feel that he's getting frustrated because special teams and offense is out of his control, and yet that's what's losing him games. He's doing his job. The defense is doing their job, and they're still losing games. So, I mean, the game's got to feel out of your hands at some points because you can't do anything in that role. So he would like to be in special teams, which I'm not opposed to seeing more playmakers on special teams, get them in there, get them to make plays, especially on the return side of things, which we'll get into a little later as well. But you didn't have any return yards all season. I think the longest return yardage we had was 19 yards. But other than that, we fair caught almost everything because we were too afraid to screw something up. And that's a result of how the beginning of the year happened with all the muffed punts and, just the mistakes that we had on special teams led us to not even attempt to try to get those hidden yardage that Scott Frost always talks about. Flipping over to the special teams, we did not attempt a single field goal, as I mentioned, but Iowa special teams really won them the game here. So they kicked 4 for 4 on field goals. It's the 3rd time we've faced a kicker that hasn't missed one, or this year that we've faced a perfect kicker. We did have a blocked punt, as I mentioned. Pristup had a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown. Oliver Martin fielded a punt on the 7-yard line, which led to our safety. Iowa won the field position most of the day. Their punter was really good about pinning deep, putting it where he wanted to. But just the defense and the special teams combining for stopping Nebraska's offense, forcing 3 and outs, and then kicking the ball, and then being able to return it up for some yardage. Iowa special team accounted for 19 total points in the game out of their 28 total. So you had the 4 field goals and the return touchdown, blocked punt. So as if we needed another one, this was just another example of and a reminder that we need to focus on special teams going forward. Special teams has been atrocious for quite a while. A lot of people are expecting us to have a special teams coach, like specifically to only teach special teams. I'm not sure. I mean, looking across the board at different colleges, I don't see that being like the standard to have a special teams coach, but I've never also seen a special teams that was as bad as Nebraska's has been this year. So special teams is going to be vital to success moving forward, and I hope to see a ton of improvement on that front. So overall in the game, I mean, for the first 3 quarters, you were happy with how Nebraska played. You were kind of impressed that Logan Smothers was able to operate the offense as well as he was. Like I said, he played his part nearly perfectly. He did have some bungled. He had some bobbled like handoffs and things like that. But again, that comes down to having essentially 3 days of practice with the first team. Not having that chemistry built with your running backs on where they want it to put, whether they want it high up on their chest or want it lower in the gut, like when you're handing off. Things like that really play a part when you're not used to taking those reps, especially at game speed. So his confidence helped a ton in those drives. He wasn't going out there like second guessing himself, but you could see the lack of experience kind of hurt him on the back end. The defense held Iowa to 9 points through 3 quarters, and Iowa looked deflated. You really had a sense going into the fourth quarter with the lead that we had, because up to this point this year, it's always been one mistake away from losing a game. You had a cushion of 12 points. They have to get 2 touchdowns to beat you there. But one special teams disaster marked a turn in the game, and Nebraska crumbled at that point. Late collapse spun off of that blocked punt touchdown, and momentum shifted just like that. Like it was a flip of a switch, and we were somehow falling apart at the seams. If you look back, so at the end of the third quarter, the Black Shirts recovered a fumble, and Nebraska drove it down and scored a touchdown. They capped off a 95-yard drive with a touchdown, which up against the Iowa defense is impressive in itself. So they go 95 yards down the field, score a touchdown, and we go up 21-6. All the momentum in the world was on our side at that point. We had recovered a turnover, which Iowa does not turn the ball over in their running game, and we recovered it, scored a touchdown, went up 21-6. Iowa comes out on the next drive and kicks a field goal, so it's still 21-9 at that point. We're up 12. Going into the fourth quarter, we had a 94.6 win probability. And that's not the first time this year that that's happened, that we've had a really high 90% chance to win a game, and 7.5 minutes later, Iowa ties up the game. Special teams gets credit for sparking the Iowa fire, but the offense did not help Nebraska at all here. So like I mentioned, the 4 drives in the fourth quarter, the first drive was a fumble, second drive resulted in a safety, the third drive resulted in a 3-and-out punt, and then the fourth drive ended with the interception. I mean, you struggle to find answers. Cam Taylor-Britt made the same comments in his postgame. He just doesn't have answers for this game. It doesn't seem real. It seems like a dream that you're playing good football, especially the defense. They're playing good football and they're losing games. And that just, it's hard to explain these things away. So what does the win-loss mean for the Nebraska team? So Iowa beats Nebraska for the 7th year in a row. Nebraska's first 9-loss season since 1957. Nebraska went 1-8 in conference despite a dead even scoring differential. So we weren't outscored by opponents by a ton of points. That's not explaining how you go 1-8 in conference. With a 0-point differential, you expect that to be like 50-50. You expect out of 9 wins, you have 5 or 4 wins on the season in conference. But we don't. We lost every single game but one against Northwestern, which happens to be the worst team in the Big Ten. I mean, that's hard to explain away. I don't understand. Statistically, I would like to see somebody go really deep into the depths of the stats this year and look at, like I mentioned, we go into the fourth quarter with that 94.6 win probability. Out of all of the times this season that we've had a majority chance to win a game and then we still lose that game, what is the statistical probability that happens 9 times in a season, that you lose the game that you probably should win at some point in that game? I like stats like that, so that would be something I'd be interested in seeing. But the 9th one-score loss sets an FBS record for the most in one season. It was tied at 8 last week, but we had this one against Iowa, so we are winners in some regards. But if you look at the season, Nebraska never gave up in a game. They always fought through it. They didn't get blown out at any point in the game. They felt like we had a legitimate chance in every single game we played. There's been a lot of games in the past where going into the fourth quarter, we were getting the crap kicked out of us, and it was just not fun to watch the fourth quarter. They had you watching every single fourth quarter this year because there was always the chance that they were going to win. There was always the chance that something would happen and Nebraska could come out with the victory. So despite the record, the fans still showed up because of that. I think the fans show out because you're giving the team fight, or the team's showing you fight, the team's showing you grit, and they're showing you that they can persevere through a lot of downs in the season. And the fans supported the team, they supported the players, they supported the program. Not everybody likes Scott Frost, but I think that if you are a dedicated Husker fan, you will support the team regardless, because complaining about stuff is just not going to change it for the better. Looking forward, though, I'm still hopeful for the program and its future. A lot of people are down that this is year 4 under Scott Frost, and that they just feel like, I mean, I specifically look onto Twitter, and Twitter seems to be a dumpster fire after every single loss. And a lot of it, they take out on the head coach saying that he doesn't know what he's doing. There's a good probability that Scott Frost doesn't know what he's doing. But do you think firing him in the moment is going to help the season next year or hurt it? I don't think, if you look at the team, and I think people sit there, I've talked about this in the previous episode too. So people look at win-losses as the black and white of football. There is so much minutia that goes into a game in the 60 minutes of football leading up to that result, that win-loss. There's so much that can happen in 60 minutes of football that if you're just looking at the end result and you're not looking at what happened during the game, then it's easy to write that off and say that, oh, that team sucks. They lost 9 games this year. But that's not it at all. You watch the games, and Nebraska played good at most of the game. Most of the games that they played in, they played well enough to win, and it just crumbles. And it's hard to explain that. But you feel close, and you hate hearing that all season, that you're super close. You just need to get over that ledge. You need to get over that hump. But I feel like I truly do. I feel like Scott Frost has changed the culture enough that we're no longer satisfied with getting blown out. And now we're getting to the point where we're no longer satisfied with being close. So I think the next step next season would be to obviously win these games. But if you look back, I think that a lot of people also, I mentioned the minutia of college football. Aside from just what happens in the 60 minutes of football, there's a lot that has happened in college football in general across the nation that there's a lot of conversations to be had. I've mentioned this on Twitter, that there's a lot of conversations to be had, but people just don't want to have it. They don't see it, so they don't see the point in it. They just want to look at your record, and then that's what they're going to judge you on. But if you look back, since Scott Frost took over as the head coach of Nebraska, the transfer portal rule has changed, and it's created almost a free agency. So he has to deal with that. We've seen that with the top 2 receivers going out back-to-back years, essentially. You had COVID disrupt the last season that we had, and threw entire rosters into a stir. Through kids that wouldn't have stayed, they stayed because they didn't get to play more than 8 games last year. You have kids that would be graduating this year that are able to come back next year. So that throws the roster and the recruiting that you can give out scholarships. It throws a lot of things up in the air, and you're really not sure how to deal with that effectively. Even currently, we're still seeing how the COVID rule affects us. So we don't know who's coming back next year and who is going off to do whatever, whether they transfer out, whether they go to the NFL. But before, you only have to look at the seniors when that's the rule. Now you have to look at the seniors and the guys that were seniors last year. You have to look at guys that can come back because of that COVID rule and how that's going to affect your scholarships going forward. You also have the NIL deals coming into play, where players are getting paid now. So the plus side for that is that Nebraska has a great supportive fan base, and that's a big draw for recruiting, I'm sure. The downside is, why would people come to Nebraska where it's snowy for half the year? You're playing in cold football. You're not playing in nice Florida or Texas or California weather. Why come here when you can get paid at home? You can be on TV at home. Why go to the middle of nowhere where there's nothing to do besides football? And I think that's the downside of that. So there's been major those 3 right there, the transfer portal, the COVID, and the NIL deals. So those 3 major shifts in college football have happened in the last 4 years under Scott Frost. So it's not like he came in here, and I brought this up before, that I think he came in here not knowing exactly what the Big Ten was going to be like. And on top of that, he has to now deal with 3 major changes to the fabric of college football. Regardless, supporting the program through its ups and downs is part of being a fan. So I think a lot of these people that want to sit here and just look at that record and say that Frost needs to go and we need to bring somebody else in after 4 years, again, I think that they're missing a lot of that, and they just need to be supportive regardless. I'm not saying be blindly supportive of a coach. I truly believe that next year is going to be a big year for Scott Frost. If things go the exact same way they did this year, then I think that's a serious discussion to have. But I feel like if you look at these things and you think that those are just excuses, then you're missing the whole conversation there. I'm excited for the news that's going to come out in the next few months, though, with the offensive staff hires. I'm excited to see how the roster starts to shake up because of those hires, and then also who they're able to pull in and what kind of system they're going to run. Who's staying, who's moving on is going to be very important. Along with that, how does that affect the recruiting, and how do we hit the transfer portal? Do we bring guys in that are going to affect, are going to play into the system and hopefully make an immediate impact? Or are we going to go after guys to kind of help strengthen the depth of the team? We are losing a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball. I would like to see some offensive line transfers if we could. But the downside of all of this being that we now have to wait 8 months to see how this experiment is going to pan out. We will have to see if Frost is able to ascend in his prove it year next year. I mentioned that next year is going to be major for him. There's a reason that they restructured his contract, and essentially the restructure cuts off in October after 6 games. So through 6 games, those first 6 games are going to be crucial to if Frost is able to retain his job. And the year as a whole is kind of going to be the same picture, but those first 6, after those 6, that's when his buyout deal gets cut in half. So If he gets bought out before then, he gets his current buyout. If he gets bought out after that, then he gets it cut in half. So there's a reason that they did that, and I think that Trev Alberts is giving Frost more leash than he would anybody else, but I truly believe Frost is the guy to do it. I think Trev Alberts is in the same boat. But that's going to wrap up the final recap of the 2021 season. I'm not sure what the schedule looks like going forward as far as the off-season content, but I do plan on doing deeper dives into the staff changes once we hear more about that. And also just looking back at how crazy this season played out, and also just having those more general college football discussions, as I mentioned. Like, I would like to get into how I think that the transfer portal and the COVID and the NIL is shaping college football. And I mean, there's just lots of good talks and conversations to have going into that. Hopefully we can bring in some guests and have that, so it's not just all just me blabbering about. We can have some actual discussions. So if you have any suggestions or topics you'd like to hear about in the off season, go ahead and comment below, or you can find me on Twitter at Cobsmacked Pod. But until next time, go Big Red.